Hey guys, welcome to another video here on the AviationPro channel. Today we're going to take a look at VOR DME approaches, a long requested video. Now we're going to do this in two ways basically. First we're going to take a look at a rather simple type of VOR DME approach, and then we're going to take a look at a more difficult VOR DME approach, because VOR DME approaches come in different sizes and shapes and difficulty, so it's interesting to look at. I'm currently flying around in the area of Graz in Austria, a small little airport with a nice VOR DME approach that I will use as the first example. Now, of course, you first need to understand what is a VOR, what is a DME, and what's the difference between VOR DME approach and a localizer approach and ILS approach. Now, as you can see, we have some nice clouds. While I talk, we can enjoy some of those nice clouds. But anyway, the thing is with an ILS approach, it gives you lateral and vertical guidance, right? So as you fly the ILS approach, what you will have here on the PFD is these diamonds which show you the deviation from the localizer and the deviation from the glide path. And this ILS is very accurate, giving you this vertical and horizontal information, guiding you down through the runway. And this localizer and this is based on the base of the runway of the airport, making sure that it's aligned with the center line of the runway. And the glide slope is set up in such a way that the signal kind of ends on the touchdown zone where you want the airplane to land, which is of course especially important if you're doing an auto land. Now then we have localizer approaches. Localizer approaches do not have this vertical information. The glide slope is not there, so it's like an ILS but without a glide slope. This localizer might still be based on the base of the runway, aligned with the center line, but it also often happens that the localizer is located somewhere different on the airport, or is not really well aligned with the center line of the runway. Take Innsbruck for example. That's one of those airports which has a localizer which is offset. So VOR, as you may know, stands for VHF omnidirectional radio range, and basically it means that it sends signals in all directions. So it signals in all 360 degrees. What this allows you to do is that you will be able to navigate to that station and from that station in any direction. Now, when you arrive at an airport, you get to use that information to fly to that VOR station and fly to the airport. Now, it kind of gives the same lateral guidance as a localizer would, except in all directions. But the different thing with VORs is that they're not always positioned at the base of the runway, and they are not always positioned, right with the center line. So they might be, somewhere next to the runway, somewhere near the airport, or a totally different location, which makes it difficult and makes the approach less accurate, because you're not going to be aligned with the center line of the runway in most cases. So let me just make a left turn here. We're approaching some mountains, so I'm just kind of vectoring myself around while we wait to join the approach into Graz Airport. And we're going to take a look at the chart of Graz Airport, and we can see kind of the most simple form of VOR approach that you can get. Okay, so in this case, if you look at the chart, the VOR station is located to the south of the airport, basically at the end of the other runway. So it's kind of aligned with the center line, which is great, because then it means that we have a more accurate approach, and it means that we're going to be more aligned with the center line, and we don't have to make some kind of weird turn at the end to line up with the approach. Okay, so we're just going to review the chart of Graz Airport step by step. That's always the best thing to do when you learn about new approaches or when you learn about new airports. Okay, so let's go. As you can see, instrument approach charts of ICAO. The aerodrome elevation is 1120 feet, threshold elevation of runway 17 is 1115 feet, and I've already entered that in the pressurization panel. Okay, then we have the frequencies of the radio stations, or the air traffic control station. We're not going to be using them today. Then we have a VOR runway 17 chart. Okay. Now, as you can see, the chart contains some nice coloring indicating the high terrain in this area, and this makes this approach important because we don't want to go below the profile of the approach, because then we might hit some high terrain. As you can see, there's some high mountains in the area, and some obstacles as well. The DME is required, indicating that we have to make use of the DME that's associated with the VOR station. So DME stands for distance measuring equipment, allowing you to measure your distance from a station. Without this DME, it's going to be difficult for us to descend. We'll talk about that in a minute. Transition altitude is 10,000 feet. Okay, so I'm already on the local QNH, pretending that the transition level is something like 120. So bearing tracks and radials are magnetic, altitude, elevation, and heights are in feet, and distance are in nautical miles. Okay. Then we have the minimum sector altitude box. This kind of basically tells you what kind of the safe altitudes are to fly in relation to this VOR station. If you're not flying an approach, or if you are being vectored, if you're being vectored or if you're flying an approach, then you do not have to look at that. But if you're just flying around in this area, IVAR, then you have to use this information to make sure that you're staying clear of the terrain in the area. But we're flying an approach, so we're just going to follow the profile of the approach. And as you can see, it starts right here at the initial approach fixed RNAV. Now I've already selected in the FMC the approach. As you can see here, arrival. I've selected VOR DME runway 17 center. Other runways, I think at this airport are Graz runways, that's why this one is called 17 center. And we're going to start this approach at the RNAV as according to the chart. So just pretending that we're directly being vectored to this waypoint. Okay. So let's take a look at the lags page, and as you can see, indeed it starts with RNAV. So we're going to fly direct this waypoint in a minute. Okay. I'll execute it for now. In the meantime, I'll just keep vectoring myself around. So we're just going to review this approach. So the initial approach fixed RNAV starts at 21.9 DME of Graz. Now Graz is the VOR station that I just talked about at the base of the other side of the runway 17. So the frequency of Graz, as you can see on the chart, is 116.20. So we're going to tune that in VOR stage, or the VHF navigation radio, 11620. And if we turn this on, I think we should already be able to identify it. As you can see, VOR1 Graz, we're 37.7 DME away from that VOR station. So at least we have identified that we have the correct VOR station. That's very important. So at 21.9 DME of Graz is this waypoint RNAV, and it starts at 7,500 feet or above. Remember, if there's a line below the altitude stated on the chart, it means you cannot descend through that line, so 7,500 feet or above. If there's a line on top of the altitude stated on the chart, then you cannot fly above that line, so 7,500 feet or below. And if there are two lines, then you have to fly at that altitude, so kind of at 7,500 feet. In this case, the line is under, so that's 7,500 or above. And as you can see, as selected in the approach, it's already stated as 7,500 or above, so that's good. Okay, then we're going to continue the approach, and there are going to be different points at which you're going to check the altitude in relation to the DME. Because as I said, we don't have a glide slope, so we need some kind of other way to determine what the correct glide slope is going to be for this approach. And we do that by just measuring the distance from the station and comparing our altitude at a certain distance to what the altitude should be on the chart. So for example, at 17.4 DME of Graz, our altitude should be 7,000 or above. And as you can see, that's indicated by this line here. So just with the VOR approach, you're just going to constantly cross-check with the DME whether your altitude is correct. Okay. Now the inbound course to this VOR is 166. Okay, so we're going to tune it into the MCP here, the course 166. And as you can see, already a green line is appearing on the navigation display, indicating the course to the VOR station. Okay, so we're going to put that on 166, and I'll make a little left turn already, so we can fly direct to RNAV in a minute. Now, as you can see, for this approach, this line, this 160 course or 166 course of into the VOR station aligns very well with the route as presented by the FMC data. But it might also happen that you know, if you are radial that's associated with this approach looks like this, or more looks like this, alright? But in this case, it lines up very well with the approach in the FMC, because this VOR station is at the base of the other runway basically, but it's already pretty well aligned with the center line. Okay. Okay. So 166 degrees is the inbound course. So we're gonna fly to the VOR station. A radial from a VOR station, as I said, is from a VOR station. It would be the other way around. So that would be kind of like this 346. That's from the VOR station, but we're gonna fly to the VOR station, so we're going to fly a course to the VOR station, and that course is 166. So we're going to turn the line around just like that. Okay, 166. Alright, so we're going to continue with reviewing the chart. So our route will just take us to Graz Airport, runway 17. But now we're going to take a look at the vertical profile, which is, I think, handy. So as you can see, we start at row knots, then a 166 course to the runway, and you can see the different DME points where we're going to have to check our altitude. So 17.4 DME from Graz, 11.7 DME from Graz, 6.7, 4.7 and 4.0. And then at the end you can see the missed approach point, which is 3 DME from Graz. So if we don't see the runway by then, at 3 DME we're going to have to go around and try again, or wait for the weather to clear, for example. Okay. In the case of a missed approach, we're going to climb straight ahead when passing 2,500 feet, turn left to NDB Golf Bravo Golf, and continue to climb to 5,000 feet and hold. Okay, as stated on the route. Okay, so so for the obstacle clearance altitude, the straight-in approach for the VOR DME, as you can see, for the minimums, which indicate the altitude at which we're going to decide whether we go around or not, which corresponds with the missed approach point of 3 DME, is 1510 feet. So let's enter that in the minimums. So I'm going to use the barrow setting, which is the obstacle clearance altitude, because height is always like the height above the airport elevation, but the altitude refers to the sea level altitude, so that's 1510 in this case, as you can see on the chart. And because the airport elevation is something like 1100 feet, the decision height, or the obstacle clearance height, is 400 feet, because that's 400 feet above the airport ground level. Okay, so this is kind of how the approach is set up. Now, of course, the Boeing 737 comes with an FMC, with a GPS system. It has LNAV and VNAV capabilities, basically allowing you to fly this approach using LNAV and VNAV. Now, I'm not sure how it's done in the real world, if they really follow the VOR, if they use a very manual type of flying this approach, or if they are you know, just using LNAV and VNAV while checking the VOR. Personally, I like the hands-on approach a little bit more, so I like to kind of manually adjust my vertical speed to fly this approach. But you can definitely, I think, use LNAV and VNAV as a reference. I think what I will do for this approach, because there's so many restrictions in high terrain, I think I will use VNAV just to guide me down on this approach. So let me just make a turn here. So yeah, as I told you, I think you can use LNAV and VNAV. I'm not sure what the rules and regulations are regarding this in the real world. But what you can also do, of course, is you know, just use vertical speed and set a lower altitude, and make sure you cross-check with the DME to make sure what your altitude should be according to the chart. Okay. So I'm now flying back a little bit. In the meantime, I will check my approach speeds. Okay, 30.125. Final approach speed will be 130. I might reduce my speed already a little bit, just to make sure we fly this approach slowly, so it gives me time to explain stuff. We've got some beautiful scenery here, by the way. It's pretty cool. So as you can see also on the chart, the approach descent gradient is 7.5%. Now normally this gradient is about 5.2%, so this approach is a little bit more steep, which makes this approach even more exciting for this particular airport. But there are, of course, there are also just approaches where you will fly a normal glide slope, so to speak. Okay, so I will set flaps 1 already. There we go. And I'm gonna fly direct Ronald, so I'm just gonna pretend now that air traffic control has directed us to this waypoint, but if you're following the star of this airport, if you're really flying a route, then you'll probably also end up at this waypoint, okay? So I'm just gonna fly direct to that, and I'm gonna engage LNAV, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, we're now flying inbound Ronald. I'm just gonna select the altitude to 1500 feet, which is basically the altitude at which we're gonna decide whether to go around or not. 1510 feet to be more precise. Now again, you can use LNAV or VNAV. I think I'm going to use the hand-on approach as I said. As you can see, I'm already kind of catching up with the VNAV path as indicated by here. So it's now following the VNAV path at a very slow speed, which I don't mind actually. Okay, so we're now flying inbound Ronald. If we would continue flying right now, as we are on LNAV mode, as you can see on the MCP, we would just be flying kind of a GPS approach, but of course that's not what we want. So we've tuned in the course right here, 166 inbound to the VOR station. So I'm going to arm VOR lock modes. So for an ILS approach, as you can see on the PFD, it's now armed. For an ILS approach, you would press the approach button, of course. In that case, you would see VOR localizer and glide slope. In this case, we don't have the glide slope, so we're just gonna be flying on the localizer. Okay. So the FMC says some drag is required. I think I already put some speed brakes out. I can select flaps 5 for some more drag. Okay, so let's keep a close eye on what's gonna happen right now. I think the VNAV system is kind of messing up with my speed, so I think I'm just going to switch to the manual mode shortly. But we're going to constantly cross-check with the chart what our distance is to the VOR station and what our altitude is, and to make sure that that is correct. Okay, so we're soon approaching Ronald, as you can see. And if we're going to switch to VOR mode just for a second, you can see that the inbound course is already coming up, and as you can see, as indicated by the 2 tags here, it indicates we're going to fly to the VOR station. If I would turn the course knob 180 degrees around, then we would be flying from the VOR station, but we don't want that. We want to fly to the VOR station, right? Okay, so it's coming up already. That's pretty nice. But as you can see, VOR lock mode is now active. So we're now flying kind of on the localizer, but it's not a localizer, it's a course to a VOR station, alright? So we're just gonna track that. And our next point of reference on the chart, as you can see, is 17.4 DME, and at this point we should be at 7,000 or above. Okay, now we can again cross-check with the VNAV path to make sure it's kind of correct. In this case, it seems to be right. So yeah, pay good attention at what is enunciated on the PFD, right? So the aircraft is now using FMC speed, so it's following the speed. It's trying to follow the speed. It's on the VOR lock mode, meaning it's tracking a course to VOR station, and it's flying on the VNAV path, right? As calculated by the FMC. Now again, I would also be able to use vertical speed, which I might do in a minute. Anyway, we're crossing now 18 DME. So as you can see on the chart, 17.4 DME. Okay, there we go. Our altitude should be 7,000. Okay, that's kind of correct. And now the airplane really starts descending. I think I will just put flap stand out for an extra bit of drag. Because this is the part of the approach where we've kind of cleared the mountains, I think, and we're gonna descend faster. Okay, and next point of reference, we look at the chart again, is 11.7 DME. At that altitude we have to be at 5,200 or above. And as you can see, it's already indicated. Okay, so just keep monitoring the approach, make sure everything is right. You might want to lower the gear already at this stage. For example, at Innsbruck you would lower the gear also very early on. So this is kind of similar with this high terrain. It adds a little bit more drag, especially to an aircraft which is hard to descend like the Boeing 737. Okay, so depending on the approach, there are going to be multiple points. Some approaches you have to check at every nautical mile what your altitude is. This approach it's a bit more easy, there's a little bit more space, but as you can see at the end there are more points of reference. There's 6.7 DME, there's 4.7 DME, and then there's 4 DME, and then there's the missed approach point. So at that stage we're really going to have to make sure we're going to fly at the correct altitude. Okay, so we're approaching our next point of reference. We're now 13.3 DME, and our altitude at 11.7 DME should be 5,200 feet. Okay, so it seems to be doing well. It's also indicated by the VNAV path, as you can see, so that's okay. The VNAV path and the actual path that's portrayed in the charts usually do align pretty well and are correct. Okay, looking good. We've passed 11.7 almost. Let's take a look. 11.7, 5,200 feet or above. Okay, we're a little bit low. As you can see, it's also indicated by the VNAV path. Why don't we just use vertical speed for a second? So I'm gonna open vertical speed. I'm just gonna set in a fixed vertical speed. Now for normal approach it's 5.2%. The vertical speed should be about minus 700 feet per minute, okay? But this approach is a bit more steep, so we're gonna have to make sure we descend fast enough. So now we look at this indicator. This indicator is also displaying the VNAV path. As you can see, we're kind of high right now, so I'm just gonna increase the vertical speed slightly. Okay. In the meantime, I'll just go back to final approach speed. I'll just quickly check what that was. 130 knots, 125 plus 5, sorry. And I'll just select flaps 30 already. So next point of reference on the chart is 6.7 DME, and at net altitude we have to be at 2,900 feet or above. As you can see, it's also indicated in the FMC. Okay. And I think we're going a bit slowly, so I'm gonna increase the rate of descent a little bit. Maybe even more. 2,500 feet. So far we're pretty stable, but we're a bit high. So 6.7 DME should be 2,900 feet. As you can see, we're a bit high. And you also make sure you have selected the correct QNH, otherwise this approach is not really going to work out, okay? Alright, 6.7 DME, we're still a bit high, and as you can see, we already can see the runway. I'm just going to make the screen a little bit smaller right now. So at this stage you would also be able to just continue manually, right? But I think I will just keep descending right now. Next point of reference, 4.7 DME, we should be at 2,000 feet. So let's see what happens. Alright, 5.2. I'm just gonna fly manually right now because I think we're a bit high, which might be due to the scenery mismatch with the data. As you can see, we're not entirely aligned with the ILS, or with the center line, sorry. 4.7 we passed, we're just at 2,000, going relatively well. Next point of reference, 4 DME, 1,700 feet. Alright, that's correct, and I'll just continue visually right now. and 3.7 DME. That's our minimums. Okay, and we'll just continue the landing. And we'll continue the landing manually. Turn the flight directors off, we don't really need them.
100, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
And we'll land the airplane. There we go. And we'll bring it to a stop. So as you could see at the end there, it was quite exciting. We were not entirely aligned with the center line. Again, that's because this is a VOR DME approach. It's not a localizer, which is perfectly aligned with the base of the runway in most cases. So we had to kind of make a little left turn in order to align with the center line. And we're coming in quite high with a steep angle in this approach. So it's very important to make sure you check the altitude restrictions. Just follow the course using the VOR localizer mode. That's very easy. I mean, the horizontal path is not that hard to follow. It's really mostly about the altitude. So checking with your DME whether your altitude is correct or not. Okay. So this was kind of a simple approach. It might look a little bit terrifying at this stage, you know, a lot of things happening at the same time. But as you do more and more VOR approaches, they become a little bit more easy. But some VOR approaches are more complex. For that, we're going to take a look at an approach in Dubrovnik in Croatia. Okay, guys. So now welcome to Dubrovnik. In the area of Dubrovnik, we're flying, and we're going to take a look at this approach. Now, this approach is a little bit more difficult, and you will see that when we look at the charts, because the airport is surrounded by high terrain and all that stuff, and the approach is quite complex, more complex than the simple approach where the VOR station was basically at the base of one of the runways. Okay, so as you can see, we're now flying above the sea. I'm going to vector myself a little bit again, just to take some time, and we're flying slowly. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart again. We're just gonna use the same procedure, just like with any approach. Just review the chart from top to bottom, and yeah, make sure we understand it. Okay, so there we go. We have here the instrument approach chart to runway 30 at Dubrovnik. The aerodrome elevation is 527. It's already set. There we go. It's not set. 500. There we go. In the pressurization panel, then we have the 8C frequencies again. We're not going to use. Okay, so there are two insets here in the charts. As you can see here, inset 2, which is some extra information. Basically, that indicates the Kilo Lima Papa NDB. That's where we're going to start the approach, and that's where we're going to direct the LNAV direct to in a moment as well. If you're flying en route from the north, it's likely that you end up at that waypoint. At least I did when I last flew to Dubrovnik. Okay, so from there, at that point, we're going to start the procedure, and then there's another inset which shows you the lights that you will be able to see when you approach this runway. Okay, so just indicating what kind of visual landmarks or visual marks around the runway you should look for when you continue visually. As you can see, this airport is surrounded by high terrain. One of the sectors is actually not to be used by or for visual maneuvering, so that's very important to consider this high terrain, especially for the final stage of the approach, because the rest of the approach basically takes place above the sea, so there's nothing that much that can go wrong there in terms of altitude. Okay, so let's take a look. There's some more information. During northeastern winds, severe turbulence possible. Alright, well, that's okay. I think I've set a normal weather team right now, so should be not a huge issue. Altitude related to descent gradient of 5.4%. Okay, so the descent gradient is a little bit higher than normal, which is 5.2 as I said. Then we have the minimum sector altitude again. We have some more notifications like DME is required. Altitude corrections due to wind is on pilot's discretion, and procedure not to be used when lights indicating the approach are inoperative. Okay, so that's when the lights on the ground don't work, then you cannot fly this approach. But what's most important for us is of course the route. So we're just going to review the route step by step, see what we come up with. Okay, so we're going to start at Kilo Lima Papa. I'm going to turn the aircraft already. Let's do adding 360, and I'll open up the navigation display. As you can see, this is where the approach starts Kilo Lima Papa. And as you can see already, also there's a lot of high terrain, so that makes this approach very interesting. Okay, so let's take a look. Continue with the chart. Kilo Lima Papa. So that's not the skill. It takes a little while before we arrive at our next waypoint, which is Olegu. As you can see, that's on radio 235 from Dubrovnik VOR. Dubrovnik VOR is right here at the airport. As you can see, it's not at the base of the runway. It's more kind of like at to the left, to the base of the runway. So it's not really to be used to align with the center line. Okay. Then we're gonna fly a little bit further, and we're gonna fly a DME ARC. So what is that? Basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna fly a constant distance from the VOR station. Think about satellites, for example, that are flying at a constant, well, mostly constant altitude or distance from the Earth ground level, and they have to make kind of a constant fall to the Earth in order to maintain that altitude. Same with the VOR station. In order to maintain an distance of, in this case, 11 nautical miles, we're gonna have to somehow turn constantly so we do not float away from that VOR station, so to speak. Okay, so I'm gonna show you in a minute how that works. So we're gonna fly this arc, and then at some point, as you can see on the chart, on radio 143 from, again, radio from the VOR station of Dubrovnik, we're gonna intercept the 316 inbound course to the VOR station to fly the approach. Okay, and then we're just gonna follow the profile until the missed approach point, which is 3.8 DME from Dubrovnik. At that stage, if we do not see the runway, we're gonna have to go around. As you can see, what we'll have to do then is make a left turn heading 274, and we're gonna fly back to the Kilo Lima Papa NDB, from which we're gonna start the approach in a minute. Otherwise, if we do see the runway, we're gonna make a right turn heading 340, and then a left turn heading 295 to go to the runway 30. Okay, so as you can see, a very interesting approach, actually. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna fly direct to Kilo Lima Papa. Let's first select the approach. So what I did is I select the VOR approach runway 30 and transition Kilo Lima Papa, because that's where we're gonna start from. So I'm just gonna replace this, execute, and I'm gonna engage LNAV. There we go. So we're now gonna fly to Kilo Lima Papa. As you can see in the FMC, we have to be at 4,000 at that point. Olegu also 4,000. And I'm just gonna let's take a look. Let's remove these displays. I'm just gonna review the approach also in plan mode to give you kind of a top-down view. So we're gonna fly to Kilo Lima Papa, then to Olegu, and then we're gonna fly to a little bit further until we reach 11 DME from Dubrovnik VOR. And as you can see, the LNAV system draws a straight line to the next waypoint, but of course we're not really gonna do that. We're gonna do it the proper way. We're actually gonna fly an arc, and then we're going to make that turn, as you can see on the chart as well, various steps, and then at some point we're just gonna continue visually to runway 30. Okay, so that is clear. Now, of course, we want to fly the arc, so in order to have some a visual reference, it's good to use the fix page, which you can enter any fix you want. In this case, I've entered Dubrovnik VOR, so Delta Bravo Kilo, and then you can enter a radial and a distance from that VOR station. So the distance we're going to fly this arc is 11.0, and we could, for example, take the radial of the which coincides with the inbound course 316, but then 180 degrees turn around, radial 316, as you can see on the chart. So let's do, radial 136 at 11 DME. Okay, so what this does is will draw a nice line around the VOR station. So if we're going to step to the point where we're going to fly the arc again, as you can see, what we want to try to achieve is fly this green line, not necessarily this magenta line as represented by the LNAV data. You can, I think, in the real world, I'm not sure, but to do it a little bit more the manual style, kind of the way you would do it in general aviation airplanes, I will actually just use the VOR and do it that way. Okay? Okay. So we're now flying into Kilo Lima Papa. It will take a little while. Again, I'm flying slow to be able to explain everything. Make sure you watch your speed. You might want to lower your gear already, for example, when you're flying that DME ARC, just for some extra drag and to make sure you're flying slow enough. So I'm gonna already select a flap speed 122. Okay, final approach speed will be 127. Okay. Just make sure you do all that already. Okay, so let's take a look. So far so good. So how are we going to fly this DME ARC if we are not using LNAV? For LNAV seems very simple to use, of course, but we're gonna do it kind of more the hand-on approach way. So what we're gonna do basically is we're gonna fly a constant perpendicular flight path to the radials of the VOR station. So what do I mean by that? Now, as you can see, if we go into plan mode again, there we go. So we're now flying into Kilo Lima Papa. We're shortly gonna turn, I think. So when we arrive at this waypoint, let's use the course right here. So as you can see on the charts, the final radial at which we're going to turn to the inbound course of 316 to the VOR station is 143. Okay, so in order to fly this DME ARC, what you can do is, in steps of 10 degrees, fly perpendicular to the radials constantly. So let's take a look. For example, we can start around about at 193, for example. So in order to fly this DME ARC, we're going to fly perpendicular to this line. Okay, so and then when we arrive at 193 radial, what we're going to do is we're going to select the next radial with 10 degrees less, as you can see, and we're going to fly this perpendicular, and then make little steps so that we can fly along this DME ARC. Once I will show it in practice, then you will understand. It's a bit hard to show it this way, but we're just going to make these little steps, as you can see. So 173, then 163. And each and every time we cross that radial, we're going to enter the next one, and we're going to turn left by 10 degrees on the heading mode, and go to the next radial, and then go to the next radial, and then eventually we're going to turn it to 316, which is then the inbound course to the VOR station, which we're going to use for the final portion of the approach. Okay? Okay, but we'll see it into practice. I will fly slowly. I think I will fly on final approach speed already, just to make sure that we can execute this VOR approach properly and smoothly. Okay? So as you can already see, this approach is quite a bit more difficult than we saw with the approach in Graz. In Graz we just flew one radial. We could make small steps of DME to see what our altitude should be, and we could keep on the same radial and just descend on a nice path, which we could also use VNAV for. But in this case we're flying kind of a constant altitude, 3,200 feet, and we're only going to start further descent at 8.4 DME, as you can see on the vertical flight path part of the chart. So 316 inbound, and then the next point of reference where we're going to check our altitude is 5.6 DME, at which our altitude should be 2,260, and 4.8 DME from Dubrovnik our altitude should be 2,000, and then the missed approach point 3.8 DME is where we're going to decide whether to go around or not, and this minimum altitude is going to be 16-17 feet as indicated by the obstacle clearance altitude. So make sure again you set the local QNH for this procedure. I'm going to select the minimums to 1670, as you can see, and I will already select the altitude to the lower altitude already, something like 1600, because I'm gonna use I'm not gonna use VNAV. I'm just gonna use a manual mode if I can. Okay, so let's reduce the speed a bit further to 160 before we arrive at Olegu. Okay. Now this is where it's gonna get exciting. This is where we are about to fly the DME ARC. Okay. So what I'm just gonna do is already turn that radio. As you can see on the chart again, Olegu is on 235 radio. As you can see, that coincides with the green line. Then the waypoint here indicated by the LNAV data kind of coincides with something like 195 or something. It's a bit guesswork that I'm doing right now, but what I want to do is, you know, since the final points where we're gonna turn to the final approach course of 316 is radio 143, I'm gonna, in steps of 10 degrees, going to add to that. So for example, okay, 143, next step is 153, next step is 163, 173, 183, and then 193 is probably a nice starting point for our VOR ARC to fly the 11 DME distance, because as you can see 203 is already a little bit too early. So we're gonna start from radio 193. Okay, so what heading should you fly? Well, in this case, you know, our heading is currently, I'll just turn the heading knob as well. Our heading is currently 152. So if we want to fly perpendicular to the 193 radio, we're gonna have to fly heading 103. As you can see, here it's perpendicular, right? There's a 90-degree angle between the radio and the heading. Okay, but we're gonna I will show you what happens slowly as we fly the DME ARC. Okay. Okay, let's reduce speed further. I think I will just reduce to the final approach speed of 127, and I get the gear down and the flaps on 15. Assume we'll start our descent to 3,200 feet, which is the altitude at which we're gonna start to fly this DME ARC. Okay. Alright, I will select flaps 30 as well. So we're flying nice and slowly on this approach. And, you know, if you're flying yourself, you might want to fly a bit faster. Kind of go, see what speeds are according to the FMC. As you can see, around about 160 knots or 140 knots. But just so I can explain everything clearly to you, I'm going to fly at 127 knots, my final approach speed. Okay, so we're going to descend to 3,200 first of all. So I've engaged level change right now. And soon we'll be flying the ARC. Okay, so our distance to Dubrovnik is increasing slightly. I will go into VOR mode now. As you can see, it's now from, because we're flying a radio from Dubrovnik VOR. Okay. And as soon as we reach this LNAV point, I'm gonna turn heading 103 to fly perpendicular to the 193 degree radio of the Dubrovnik VOR station. Okay, I'm just gonna let the autopilot do the work. You can do this manually as well, but I would suggest if you're if this is the first time you're gonna fly this approach, to do it manually. Okay. Okay. So we're now on a 152 heading. And well, let me just switch to VOR mode actually, because as soon as we reach 11 DME, we're just gonna turn left to 103. As you can see, that's exactly perpendicular to the 193 radial that I've entered. Okay. Okay. So we're just gonna wait. I'm just gonna open this one for you guys as well for an extra point of reference. So we have a good view of what's gonna happen during this approach. Now don't worry, it's gonna be exciting, but actually it's gonna be pretty easy. And again, if you want to, you can also use LNAV. For example, you can create your own waypoints along the arc using fixed bearing distance. Input entry, you might want to look that up, what the fixed bearing distance entry in the 737 looks like. I'm just going to fly heading select, so I don't fly LNAV. Okay. But I like to do it a bit more manual way. Okay. So we're approaching 11 DME. As you can see, the radio was already coming up, which coincides with the green line right here. So that's correct. So let's fly heading 103 right now. So we're flying perpendicular to the 193 degree radio. Okay. And we might have to adjust a little bit because we might going to be overshooting a little bit. Okay. So far so good. We're flying 11 DME. So that's right. We're now crossing the 193 radial. So we're gonna fly towards the next radial, 183, and we're gonna subtract also 10 degrees from the heading. Okay, so we're flying perpendicular to that radial again. There we go. Okay, so it's coming up slowly. As you can see. And as soon as we cross this radial again, we're gonna fly to the next radial, 173, and we're gonna subtract 10 degrees again from the heading in order to fly perpendicular to the next radial. In the meantime, check your distance. As you can see, we're doing nicely. We're flying still 11 DME, so that's good. We're about to cross the next radial. There we go, 173 is next, and we're gonna fly heading 083. There we go. So constantly perpendicular to this line. As you can see, we're doing very nicely with the DME. No problem there at all. So also look at this line, right? Just to have a top-down view, which is a bit more clear in relation to the rest of the approach. Okay, we're now 10.9, so we might have to turn a slightly bit later on the next turn, so that we can kind of catch up with the DME. Might have turned a little bit too early, but deviation from 0.1 DME should not be a huge deal. Okay, we're crossing the 173 radial over to the next radial, 163. And I'm going to select heading 073. There we go. Again, flying perpendicular to the 163 radial in this case. So we have two more radials to go, 153 and 143. At 143 we're going to fly the inbound course 3162 to the VOR station. So we're going to have to do a lot of turning on the knob of the course on the MCP, but that's okay. There might be other ways to do it, like using the first officer's side instead, but just to make it easy, I will do it this way. Okay, 10.9 DME. Still fine, right? Not a huge deal if we're not flying exactly on that distance. Next radial 153. I'm just gonna wait a little bit with the turn until it's 11 DME again. So this is kind of a way to catch up if you're not flying entirely perpendicular yet. It's kind of a way to catch up with the DME. It's not a huge deal right now. But if it's like 0.5, then you might want to really think about, you know, making a little bit of a right turn to catch up with the DME. Okay. Okay. So heading 063. There we go. And we are already catching up with this radial. So we're gonna fly to the final radial 143, and then perpendicular again, so 053. Just think of it in steps of 10, right? subtract 10 from the radial, and in this case also subtract 10 from the heading. Okay? Okay, so when we're gonna cross this radial, we're gonna fly to the VOR station 316. So I will just like an ILS approach, use a 30-degree intercept course. So a heading 346, that should do it. And then at 8.4 DME, as according to the chart, we're gonna start our descent towards kind of 1600 feet, right? Okay, still 11 DME, we're doing very nicely. You might also want to turn on the terrain radar, or terrain display, sorry. Maybe it was already on. Oh, right, this is the first officer's one. Okay, so I'm gonna fly heading 346, and we're gonna turn the course all around to fly to the VOR station. As you can see, it has changed. So we're gonna fly the 316 inbound course, and I'm gonna arm VOR localizer mode, if that works. Okay, so I've now armed VOR lock mode, or it's already capturing it. As you can see, we're to 3,200 feet. We're gonna monitor. Now I did something wrong. I did something wrong with the autopilot. Apparently command B was active because command A was not working, so I had to select 316 inbound course here as well and tune the VOR station here as well, and the 15.40. But anyway, as you make that turn heading 346, you can intercept the inbound course of 316 to the VOR station of Dubrovnik. And in the meantime, we're going to monitor again our distance, because at 8.4 DME from Dubrovnik, we're going to start our descent towards 1670 feet. Okay, so we're doing nicely right now. Not sure if the VNAV system is entirely correct at this stage. Okay, 8.4 DME, let's start our descent. I'm going to use vertical speed mode. So 1600 feet first of all. I'm going to select about 700 feet per minute, 750, something like that. Okay. So doing nicely. So we're now flying inbound to the VOR station 316. Our next point of reference is going to be 5.6 DME, at which we have to be at 2260 feet. Okay, so 2260. I can already see the runway, so I don't think landing at this stage will be a problem. So we have to closely monitor the systems to make sure everything is alright. Okay. So the speed brakes are already armed at this stage, the landing gear is down, the flaps are down. Okay, it seems that we're doing quite nice. Might want to decrease the descent rate a little bit. Let's take a look. 5.4 DME already, so we're a bit high actually. Next point of reference is 4.8 DME, at which we have to cross at 2000. So we're slightly bit high. There we go, 4.8 DME is passed, so we're still a bit high. 3.8 DME is going to be the missed approach point. I'm going to remove the displays right now, just keep an eye here on the DME. I'm gonna disconnect the autopilot at this stage to fly the rest of the approach manually. So we're gonna fly heading 340 at 3.8 DME. There we go. And then we'll just land the airplane visually. I'll turn off the flight directors to avoid confusion. Okay, so the minimums are already passed, of course, because we crossed 3.8 DME. So heading 340, and then we'll just line up with the approach visually. As you can see, this approach is pretty exciting. Not just the VOR portion of it, but also the final portion. So this requires a bit of skill, I guess. Just gonna slightly turn in. I've only flown here once, so if I'm doing something wrong for those guys who've flown this approach more often, then you know why. There we go. Just using the puppy lights as a reference of the glide slope right now. We're flying nice and slowly. So we're very light today. There we go. Line up with the runway.
500.
And just land the airplane. There we go. That was a pretty good landing, if I may say so myself. And we'll bring the airplane to a full stop. Alright, so there you go guys, that's how you do a very complex VOR DME approach. At least that's the way I do it. Of course I'm not a real world airline pilot. In the real world they might do it a little bit differently. In the real world they might make more use of LNAV, you know, the fixed bearing distance waypoints that I talked about, to make it even more easy, so that they can kind of just create their own approach using LNAV and VNAV data. But I like to do it this way. It's a bit more classic, a bit more general aviation stuff basically. But as you can see, it's quite complex, and it's important to make use of all the VOR stations, and yeah, make sure you have a point of reference, not just relying on LNAV and VNAV data, but also be able to execute these kind of approaches. Because in the real world you might be flying aircraft that do not have advanced GPS systems, and then you're gonna have to do this kind of approach also this way. So you can see two different types of VOR DME approaches. As you can see, depending on the airport and depending on the location of the VOR station and its DME, the approach can be very different, and also due to the terrain and all that stuff. So that makes VOR DME approaches quite exciting and quite challenging at times. Because ILS approaches are, you know, at every airport it's quite similar. It's just at the base of the runway, giving you a center line and a glide slope. Very easy. But VOR DME approaches, as I said, come in different sizes, shapes and difficulty, and this one is quite difficult. So of course there are plenty of other examples. For example, the localizer approach at Innsbruck that I talked about, which is kind of similar difficulty as this. So that's quite exciting. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you understand it. This is quite a long video, but in this way, by just showing you an example, is I think a good way of showing how a VOR DME approach works. And just practice, you know, start with simple approaches, start with an approach where the VOR station is at the base of the runway, for example. So you just learn how to, you know, compare your distance using the distance measuring equipment, compare your distance to the altitude, compare the next distance to the altitude, and then the next and the next and the next, so you can create your own glide slope based on the distance to the VOR station. And from there on you can work your way up to more complex VOR DME approaches like this one. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial here on the AviationPro channel. Make sure you watch my other videos as well. There's some links here, and also make sure you subscribe and support the channel, because your help is much appreciated. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.